What's happening? Adam Drake here, and today I'm going to explain some information about emulsion shock caps and maintenance and how often to bleed your shocks when using emulsion caps. So I've done a number of videos talking about the different style caps, the difference between bladder and emulsion. So if you need additional information on that, you can check out those other videos. Today is going to be more focused on the maintenance side of it. With emulsion style shock caps, you do need to bleed the shocks a bit more often than you would with a bladder shock cap. So it's not necessarily a matter of there's more parts that wear out or anything like that. It's more of just to make sure that the shocks are correct for the temperature. So for example, if you're running basically an all-day race here in Southern California, starts 80 degrees in the morning, it gets up to 100 degrees at the peak during the day, then it goes into the night and you're racing again, it's back down to say 80 degrees. So the ideal thing to do would be to bleed your shocks in the morning when it's 80 degrees, like close to the time within a couple races of your race so that the temperature doesn't change. And then later in the day, when it becomes hot, if you need to adjust or change your shock oil, you would change your shock oil and re-bleed them at that time. But if you don't think, like maybe you went out in your first qualifier and car felt okay, but the shocks were a little bit thick. So now for round two, when it's going to be hotter, your shocks, the dampening is going to be correct. You should still re-bleed your shocks. And the reason for that is, as it gets hotter, there's going to be more pressure and you don't want to have the shock hydrolock. So you simply can just pull the shock off the car, pump the shock a few times, let it sit. I like to pull the bleeder screw out, let it sit, any of the air or extra pressure that kind of come out. And then I'll just simply re-bleed them just by compressing the shock shaft and then tightening down the bleeder screw. Then again, for your final, which is going to be later at night, back down to cooler temperature. Again, if needed, you'll adjust the oil to adjust the dampening. But if you feel the dampening was correct, you should still re-bleed the shocks because now with it being cooler, you're going to have more air. It's more critical to make sure as the weather gets hotter that you re-bleed the shock than having to top it off and re-bleed it when it cools off, because I would rather have a little bit of additional air in there, which is going to make the shock feel soft when it cools off, than when it heats up, the shock actually hydrolock and not be able to bottom out. So it is a little bit more kind of chasing the shocks throughout the day. But there are times, like say if we practice on Friday, it's 100 degrees on Friday, I bled my shocks middle of the day, and I know it's going to be the same high temperature the following day. Sometimes I won't bleed my shocks that whole day. If my car feels good, I'll just keep running it all day. But when it's an important race, you can even, like I have small bottles of oil, like a little bearing oiler bottle, where I'll put a couple different weights of shock oil in the different bottles, and you can just simply pull the shock off, pull the spring off, loosen the bleeder screw, let the shock sit on the shock stand, and then just refill it through the bleeder hole, let it sit, and then bleed the shocks so that you don't have to actually take the cap off and completely redo or re-bleed the shocks. But again, it is a little bit more to kind of keep up on, to have the emulsion style shock caps work correctly and to fine tune your car throughout the day. With the bladder shocks, there's the bladder that allows for that kind of change in temperature, and it will change a little bit the rebound, but it's not nearly as critical as it is with an emulsion shock. So you got to do a little bit more maintenance, but it will pay off on the track having a more consistent handling and better handling shocks.